Let us solve another question on pipelining. This question is given in GATE 2021. Here it goes. Consider a pipeline processor, in fact, it has to be, with 5 stages: instruction fetch, instruction decode, execute, memory access, write back. Each stage of the pipeline, except the execution stage, takes one clock cycle. Assume that the ID stage merely decodes the instruction and a register read is performed in the execution stage. The execution stage takes only one clock cycle for addition instruction and two clock cycles for MUL instruction. Ignore pipeline register latencies. Now, so far, what is given? Our pipeline has got 5 stages in it. Each stage is going to take only one clock cycle for any instruction except execution stage. This execution stage, the number of clock cycle depends on the instruction. If it is an addition instruction, it will be only one clock cycle. But if it is a multiplication instruction, the execution stage is going to take two clock cycles each. We need to ignore pipeline register latencies. What is the register latency? In between each and every stage, we do have an intermediate register. This register also has some latency, but here in this case, it is ignored. Consider the following sequence of 8 instructions. Add MUL, add MUL, add MUL, add MUL. There are a total of 8 instructions in which 4 are addition, 4 are multiplication. Assume that every MUL instruction is a data dependent on the add instruction just before it, and every add instruction except the first add is data dependent on the MUL instruction just before it, which means that each and every instruction is dependent on the previous instruction. What is the data dependency? Unless the previous instruction gets executed, following instruction cannot get its operand from the previous one. This is called data dependency. Except the first instruction, all the other instructions are data dependent. That means that this MUL is data dependent on addition, this addition is data dependent on multiplication, so on. All the instructions except the first one are data dependent on each other. Now, here there is a speed up. There are two pipeline systems considered here. The same one with the operand forwarding technique, the same one without the operand forwarding technique. Now, we need to compare the operand forwarding technique pipeline system with the other system without operand forwarding, and we need to find out what is the total speed up. By using a space-time diagram, we will be able to clearly draw this and we'll be able to clearly understand. I already did that practice for you guys. Let me show you. You can see two diagrams on the screen. The one without operand forwarding, the one with operand forwarding. If you actually can have a look at, the one without operand forwarding is consuming a total of 30 clock cycles. How these 30 clock cycles are consumed? Let us have a look at. The first instruction is going to take all the clock cycles. Of course, the first instruction is not dependent on any other instruction. As the first instruction taking all the clock cycle, second instruction multiplication will enter into the pipeline. Right after the first instruction of the second clock cycle, it enters into the decode phase in the third clock cycle, but it cannot enter into the execution phase because unless the first instruction gets completely executed, it cannot enter into the pipeline at all. So only at the 6th clock cycle, it enters into the pipeline because unless the first instruction is totally finished. Let us have a look at clearly here. We need not wait for the write back stage to finish. The multiplication instruction can actually start at the 5th clock cycle itself. But according to the question, we cannot start the multiplication parallel to the write back stage. Okay, so what we're doing is, as it is completely without operand forwarding, the multiplication will have to start from the 6th clock cycle. So at the 9th clock cycle, it is going to finish. So the addition instruction will finish its instruction fetch, instruction decode before the multiplication instruction finishes the write back at the 9th clock cycle. So addition instruction can only enter into the execution phase in the 10th clock cycle. Stay focused here. Addition instruction will finish instruction fetch and instruction decode. This instruction decode can happen here because for instruction decode, there is no restrictions. So in order to use it properly, in order to make it more clear, I just put it there. But instruction fetch and instruction decode will finish right off one after another. But for the execution, we need to wait till MUL to be finished. So right after the MUL is finished, in the 10th clock cycle, the addition instruction execution phase will get started. Finally, at the 12th clock cycle, it is going to finish. So the execution phase of the next MUL instruction will start from the 13th clock cycle. So it will finish at 16th clock cycle. So right from the 17th clock cycle, next addition instruction execution phase will get started. So when we have a look at the final instruction write back phase will get finished at the 30th clock cycle. So without operand forwarding, we do need a total of 30 clock cycles in order to completely finish the execution of the current program, rather the total instruction. Now let us have a look at the operand forwarding technique. In the operand forwarding technique, the operand will be directly forwarded to the following instruction. So right after the addition instruction is finished, the execution phase will forward the operand directly to the MUL stage. So the MUL stage, as it finishes instruction decode, it will directly take the execution, the operand from the addition instruction, because register read is going to be performed in the execution stage itself. It is clearly given in the question that register read is not a separate section, is not a separate segment. It's not a separate stage at all. So the register read, as it is going to be performed in the execution phase itself, right after the instruction decode phase, as the operand is directly available due to the operand forwarding technique, multiplication instruction will get started from the 4th clock cycle itself. So from this execution phase to this, there will be operand forwarded. Again, from the execution phase to here, there will be another operand forwarded, but here we need to wait till the execution phase gets finished, because the execution phase gets occupied by the MUL instruction. Unless the stage is completely free, the addition instruction cannot enter. So the addition instruction can only enter into the pipe right at the 6th clock cycle. So it will start execution at the 6th clock cycle, memory access, write back. So it finishes at the 8th clock cycle. Right after the 6th clock cycle computes the operand for the next instruction. From here to here, there will be operand. Okay, from here to here, operand is got forwarded. Here to here, operand has got forwarded. From here to here, operand has got forwarded. From here to here, operand has got forwarded. So the total number of clock cycle consumed with the next approach is a total of 16. Once again, let us have a look at how operand forwarding technique works. Now, unless the execution phase gets finished, we cannot get the operand. Due to the operand forwarding from the execution stage to the register read stage, operand will get directly forwarded, but the register read stage is embedded in the execution stage itself. So from the execution phase to the register read, in this case execution phase itself, operand will get directly forwarded. So the multiplication instruction can directly start its execution at the 4th clock cycle, because in the 4th clock cycle the execution phase is empty, stage is empty. So the multiplication instruction is going to consume 2 clock cycle in the execution phase. Right after it releases, the next instruction will enter into the execution phase, because the next instruction enters into the instruction fetch phase at the 3rd clock cycle, decode phase at the 4th clock cycle. It cannot enter into the execution phase because the execution phase has already got occupied. So right at the point of operand is available, it will start the execution phase. Right after the execution phase is finished, it is going to release the operand for the next instruction. So meanwhile, the next instruction will have its instruction fetch and decode gets finished before the 6th clock cycle itself. But right from the 7th clock cycle itself, the execution phase will get started because the operand is directly forwarded. And as the progress, as the process goes on, the total number of clock cycles that are going to be consumed by this is going to be 16. You can clearly see once again. Add is getting started at the 6th clock cycle. Right? Actually, add should start here only. Instruction fetch should start here. This must start here. Okay, because instruction fetch must be in uniform. Okay, so it will go this way. But instruction fetch and instruction decode can happen before the execution phase gets started. So altogether, a total of 16 clock cycles are consumed. Altogether, a total of 16 clock cycles are consumed. Okay, so the speed up is equal to 30 divided by 16, which is equal to 1.874. This is the speed up. Thank you. Hello everyone. Let us solve a question which is on DMA. What is DMA? DMA stands for direct memory access. Using the DMA approach, the CPU will be able to make a transfer in between peripheral devices and the main memory without its own intervention. That is, whenever there is a transfer in between peripheral device and the main memory, by using the other methods such as programmed IO or interrupt initiated, CPU will involve. That is, CPU is going to interfere in this transfer, which is proven to be time consuming because the transfer has to be only in between peripheral devices and the main memory. If the CPU involves in this transfer, it is going to consume a lot of time. That is the reason why most of the advanced computer systems are equipped with a feature called direct memory access. By using the direct memory access method, there will be a direct transfer initiated in between peripheral devices and the main memory. The system that we are discussing right now is equipped with a DMA support. That is, the data can be transferred directly in between peripheral device and the main memory. The DMA module is transferring one 8-bit character in one CPU cycle. Let us list out the details. In one cycle, the DMA module is transferring 8-bit character. That is, a total of 8 characters are being transferred in one cycle at regular intervals. Device to memory through the cycle stealing at the regular intervals. Consider a 2 MHz processor. The processor frequency is 2 MHz. That is, frequency of the processor is 2 MHz. Okay. Now here I will write it one more detail. If it is a 2 MHz processor, the total number of cycles per 1 second is equal to 2 into 10 power 6. This will be the total number of cycles that are available for a 2 MHz processor in 1 second. So this is the thing. If 0.5% processor cycles are used for DMA, what is the data transfer rate if the device is dash bit per second? Once again, out of the total cycles, 0.5 processor cycles are consumed for DMA transfer. Now, what is the data transfer rate per second is asked. Now we need to find out what in the total number of cycles, 0.5% cycles are allotted for DMA. That is 0.5 divided by 100 into 2 into 10 power 6 is equal to 10,000. Out of the total availability of the clock cycles, 10,000 clock cycles, rather 10,000 system cycles, CPU cycles, are just used for DMA transfer, with one cycle transferring 8 characters per second. In one cycle, how many characters are being transferred? 8 characters are being transferred. So the data transfer rate is the number of characters in one cycle into the total number of cycles that transfer is happening. 8 into 10,000. That is equal to 80,000. Data transfer rate will be equal to number of characters per cycle into number of cycles. Number of characters per cycle is equal to 8 into number of cycles that are allotted for this transfer is equal to 10,000, because total 0.5% in the total number of cycles are allotted for DMA. It will get translated to roughly, not roughly, exactly 10,000. In 10,000 clock cycles, each cycle will be able to transfer 8 characters, which translates to 80,000 characters per second. This is the answer. Per second. Thank you. Let us solve another question, which is on the cache memory. This question is given in GATE 2021. Assume a two-level inclusive cache hierarchy, L1 and L2, where L2 is the larger of two. Consider the following statements. Read misses in a write through L1 cache do not result in write backs of the dirty lines to the L2. This is the first statement. Second statement is write allocate policy must be used in conjunction with the write through caches, and no write allocate policy is used with write back caches. These are the two statements, and we need to find out the validity of the two statements. There are 4 options given in this question. S1 is false, S2 is true. S1 is false and S2 is false. S1 is true and S2 is true. S1 is true and S2 is false. Let us see what is the correct option for this. A, B, C, or D. Let us go and have a look at the statements that are given. S1, read misses in a write through L1 cache do not result in write backs of the dirty lines to the L2. Let us draw the block diagram of a two-level cache memory. In the two-level cache memory, CPU is followed by the first level cache, which is smaller. After which, we do have a second level cache, which is bigger than L1 cache. This is L1 and this is L2, followed by the main memory. Now let us understand what is write back and write through policies. In the write back policy, when the CPU wants to send a word to the main memory, initially it will just only update L1. It doesn't send a data word directly to the main memory. Initially, it will send a word to the L1, after which it is going to go ahead with the rest of the jobs. After some particular point of period, this word will be transferred back to L2 because this particular location is getting another information from L2 cache. Because cache memory, mind you, will store only the concurrent data, not the older data. So after some period of time, some point of period, this word will become older. When this word becomes older, as the arrival of a new data word, this word will have to be replaced with the new word. So at that time, the word that is going to be replaced will get transferred from L1 to L2. Similarly, from L2 to L main memory, the word will be finally transferred because this L2 corresponding word also will get the new data from the main memory after some point of period. At that time, this location must be accommodated to the incoming new word. At that time, the old word should get transferred from L2 to the main memory. At that time, the word will get completely transferred back to the main memory. This is what write back policy. In the write back policy, when the CPU wants to write a word to the main memory, initially it will send to L1. When the data, that specific data word gets older, that will get transferred back to L2. Finally, even if L2 has to replace this word as the arrival of the new word, it will get transferred to the main memory, to the corresponding location. This is the write back policy. In the write back policy, we are going to use the dirty bits to see if the word has been updated in L2 and main memory or not. This dirty bits will only be used in write back caches. We don't use the dirty bits in write through caches. So the first statement proves to be true. first statement is proven to be true. That is, read misses in a write through L1 cache do not result in write backs of the dirty line. He is talking about write through. When there is a read miss, what will happen? In a write through and a read miss, a data word will get transferred to L2 from L2 to L1, and the data word will get simultaneously also get transferred to CPU. Here there is no chance of a dirty bit. There is no question of a dirty bit. So the statement S1 is true because the statement is correct, because in a write through cache, we don't result in write backs of the dirty lines to the L2. Simple. There are no dirty lines at all because the mechanism that is being followed here is a write through cache. This is fine. Second one is a write allocate policy must be used in conjunction with the write through caches, and no write allocate policy is used with the write back caches. This statement is false because write allocate policy is a synonym for write back caches. So the write allocate policy, of course, the policy which is going to be used in write back caches cannot be used in write through caches. So this is incorrect. Again, let us consider the validity of the S2 statement. He is talking about write allocate policy must be used in conjunction with the write through. It is false because write allocate policy will be used with the write back caches. You can also consider that the write allocate policy is a synonym policy for write back caches. So S1 is true and S2 is false. In our case, D is the correct option. Thank you. Now let us solve another question which is in the topic cache memory, which is of the topic cache memory. Consider the computer system with a byte addressable primary memory of a size 2 power 32 bytes. Assume that the computer system has a direct mapped cache of 32 KB and each cache block is of size 64 bytes. The size of the tag field is dash bits. This question is given in the year 2021. Let us solve this directly. Now first, we need to get the details. Let me write the details. The size of the main memory is equal to 2 power 32, which means that the address length in the system is equal to 32 bits. I require 32 bits for addressing. Assume that the computer system has a direct mapped cache. What is the cache size? Cache size is equal to 32 KB. And the associativity is direct mapped, 32 KB. If it's a 32 KB, the number of address bits that are required to represent the cache is equal to 15 digits. Why? Because since 2 power 15 is equal to 32, so the number of bits that are required to represent an address in the cache is equal to 15. A cache address can also be called as an index. So straight away we can go ahead in identifying the number of tag field bits. For that, let us draw the diagram of an address in the system. An address in the system is equal to total 32 bits altogether, 32 bits. And this address part will be divided into two fields initially, index field and the tag field. What is index field? The number of digits that are required to represent the cache, that is equal to 15. So the index is equal to 15 and remaining bits tag is equal to 22. Then index will be further subdivided into block field and the word field. What is the word field? Word field is the block offset. What is the block offset? Size of the block is called the block offset. What is the block size? Block size is equal to 64. Block size is equal to 64 bytes. So the number of bits that are required to represent the block offset or word field is equal to 6 digits. So the 6 digits can be plotted here, and the remaining bits that has to be accommodated in the block field is equal to 15 minus 6 is equal to 9, and the tag field is equal to 22. So finally we got the number of tag digits, the number of bits in the block field, and the number of bits in the block offset. The block's offset can also be called as a word field, which is equal to 6 digits, And the block field is of 9 digits. Block field can also be called as a line field. And additionally, we do have the tag field, which is actually asked in the question, which is equal to 22 digits. So the 22 is the answer. So the total 32 bits must be divided into two fields. One is index and a tag. Directly after practicing dividing index and tag itself, you're going to get the total number of tag digits. As the index is equal to 15 bits, the remaining bits will be automatically the tag digits, as this is simply direct mapped cache. So in the direct mapped cache, the number of tag digits are equal to 22. Thank you. Let us solve a question on the number systems. If the numerical value of a 2-byte unsigned integer on a little Indian computer is 255 more than that on a big Indian computer, which of the following choices represents the unsigned integer on a little Indian computer? This question is given in GATE 2021 for 1 mark. Before we solve this question, we need to have an idea about big Indian and little Indian computer systems. Let us see what it is. Either you call it as little endian or big endian. These are one of the addressing convention to the successive bytes of the main memory. Let us see what it is. We do have two conventions. First one is big endian. Let us see what is big endian. Let us see that we do have 2 bytes. This is the first byte and this is the second byte. During the addressing of each and every byte in the main memory, in the big endian, the LSB will end up with the higher address. Let us say this is 0 and this is 1. This is LSB. This LSB will get the maximum address, rather the higher address than the previous byte. In the little endian, the scenario will be different. There will be, let us say, in a word, we do have 2 bytes in which LSB will get the smaller address and most significant byte will get the higher address. This is all about addressing. I hope you got it completely. How we are going to address in a byte addressable memory system, each and every byte will get an address. Let us say one word is equal to 2 bytes. One word is equal to 2 bytes. Okay, so this is total one word. Now, the convention of how to assign the addresses of each and every byte in a word maybe are of 2 types. One is big endian, one more is little endian. In big endian, this is the way. Least significant byte will get the higher address. In the little endian, least significant byte will get the minimal address. This is the thing with big endian and little endian. Now let us have a look at the question and once again and try to interpret the question in a correct way. If the numeral value of a 2-byte unsigned integer on a little endian computer is 255 more than that on a big endian computer, which of the following choices represents unsigned integer on a little endian computer? Now, it is clearly given that in the question, the numeral value of a 2-byte unsigned integer of a little endian computer is 255 more than that on a big endian computer. Now, first of all, we need to find out the values of each and every option here. Now, let us go with the option A. Option A. Let us say this is little endian. In this little endian, 0001 hexa will be equal to 1. Okay. And in the big endian, what will happen? This byte will be positioned first. 0100. In a byte, how many digits will be there? A total of 8 digits. In the hexa, it is represented one digit, sorry, 4 digits will be clubbed as one digit. So in the little endian, this is 0001 actually is represented as 000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000 I will write it here for an example. For the first one, it is given as the first byte is 00000000. The first byte value. Second byte value is 00000001. This is the representation. So the total value is equal to 1. Right? Now, let us go for a big endian. These are given in little endians. Now, let us go for the big endian. In big endian, what will happen? LSB will be placed first. Least significant byte will be positioned first. So 01 will be placed here, followed by 00. So this value will be equal to 00000001 00000000. So this is equal to 255. Okay. Now this cannot be the correct answer because the little endian must be 255 greater than the big endian. This is 256. But this little endian is no way is greater than big endian. So this is not the correct option. Let us go to the second one. Option B. In option B, little endian is 6665 6665, in which the decimal value will be equal to 2600 213. If you convert this hexadecimal into binary, from binary to decimal, you will get an answer 26213. When it comes to big endian, this byte will be placed initially 65 and 66. So this value will be equal to 25958. 958. So if you subtract 26213, rather, if you subtract 25958 and 26213, you're going to get 255. In this case, the little endian computer system value in a specific location of a word is greater than exactly 255 more than the big endian, as it is given in the question. So option B is one of the correct options. And let us see option C. What is option C? 0100. 0100 is equal to 256. In the big endian, 0001 is equal to 1. Right? So this is also a correct option because little endian is greater than big endian. So option B and C are correct. Anyhow, even if you exercise 4243, what is 4243? 4243, which is in little endian, has a decimal value which is equal to 16,963. But when it comes to big endian, it will become as 4342. First byte will be written first. This 42 will be written last. In this case, this value will be equal to 17,218, in which the difference cannot be 255. So option D cannot be the correct answer. C is one of the correct answers. B is one of the correct answers. And option A is also not the correct answers. So option B and C are the correct options.